Welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry, a podcast exploring the narrative of people's layered lives. Listen in on courageous conversations spoken from the heart. Gain insight into others' lives as we tackle compelling topics which will expand your mind, help you gain perspective, and might even inspire you to do things differently. My name is Evelyn, and I look forward to your company. Yes, and welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry. Today, I am with Marie Barclay, the founder of I Am Still Standing, a coaching and consulting business with a slant, who offers services to business and non-business individuals struggling with their mental well-being and emotions, empowering and igniting these clients with lived skills to increase their self-worth and confidence. So many people are craving resilience right now. Some of Marie's past life episodes have seen her experience the lowest of lows. Through her tenacity, she has been able to confront and deal with these traumas. She continues to stand strong, carry her head and heart high. She has built a life that is the most grandest life that she can imagine. And that's why she wants to serve you in doing the same, to build your grand life, where you play the leading lady or gentleman and feel the most gifted and most sensational you've ever felt in your lifetime, arriving with the unlimited version of the completely unmasked you. So welcome to the show, Marie Barclay. I'm so excited to have you here with me today.
How wonderful. What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So what I like to, I love the name of your business, I'm Still Standing. So we're going to dissect it. First, we'll talk, how did you actually come up with the name I Am Still Standing?
The name I Am Still Standing comes from the chapter that I gave in a book called The Unstoppable Woman of Audacious Confidence, where I was asked by Nala Chikwi, who is a global speaker, a publisher, and she asked me to input into this. It's actually a series, The Unstoppable Woman of Purpose, and it's part 4 of a 24-part anthology. And so when she asked me, it was the right time, Ev, because we had just sold our real estate business. I'd sort of come to the end of that.
Wow.
And at the beginning when she asked me to do this, I still didn't know what I was going to name it, but I sort of came up with the name at the end. Once I had finished my chapter, I was still standing, right? And and I think I had heard the song, the Elton John song as well, I'm Still Standing, and I just put 2 and 2 together and I named it I Am Still Standing.
I love it.
I named the chapter that, but because that was such a massive sort of time in my life when it came to naming a business, it was on top of my mind. So that was the reason.
Well, it is a very empowering name, isn't it? I Am Still Standing. Now, I spoke earlier in your bio that you've been through a few traumas in your life. So I thought maybe we would start at the beginning of, like, what is the one trauma in your life which you think has sort of defined maybe who you are or has helped you to become the person you are, because that's what this show is about, is getting through those layers and how you actually got through some of those layers of your life, which weren't so pretty.
No.
So, yeah.
No. And I remember you saying, yes, it is the ugly that I want to talk about. So thank you for wanting to have such, an honest conversation, because I feel that it is needed, and I believe in timing as well. But yeah, the time that you're talking about or seek to know more about is the time that I was in an abusive relationship, and I dealt with domestic violence for 8 years, or the majority of those years.
Wow. And so how in the beginning, when you first developed this relationship with this person and you eventually married him.
No, I didn't marry him.
Oh, you didn't marry him.
No,
Sorry,
I've only been married once.
Sorry, I should have checked that. But you also, but you had a child with him.
Yes.
So having a child, was that harder, easier, or what was the process that you did it? So when you had the child, did it make the relationship harder, or was it easier? I mean, was it?
No, I can answer that by saying it was definitely harder. But not a lot of people know that I was pregnant. I did become pregnant not long after having Renea. So that child would have been, I don't know the age now, but I'm kind of glad that I didn't go ahead with that pregnancy, because that really would have made a huge difference in my life.
Right.
I don't believe that I would be where I am today if I'd had a second child.
Right. Okay.
With him.
Okay. But what made you decide that things are really bad? I've got to get out of here. What was that sort of defining factor?
Yeah, and it's hard to answer that, Ev, in one sentence or one paragraph, right? Or even one podcast, because the abuse didn't sort of start with just a punch in the face, right? I actually remember there was a lot of emotional abuse, and there was just a lot of, telling me that I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't a good enough chef, or I wasn't a good enough, or it didn't look good enough, or it didn't sound good enough. Whatever I was saying was not good enough. So I think when you've gone through years and years of that belief, that really does dull that down, and you don't think that there's anything of you. Right? You don't feel. Yeah, you just don't feel as if not just that you don't have a purpose, but you just don't feel adequate, right?
Yeah.
You don't feel at your very, very best. And but there are a lot of things that happened, I guess, that came to the crux of making that decision to leave and leave immediately. But some of the things were, I had Renea, right? So I'd already had Renea, and she was still a baby, so I would say wasn't even maybe 3 months old. But
Wow.
I got up and I said that I was leaving him, and then there was just this thud that just came out of nowhere, right?
Oh my goodness.
And I think guys just know how to hit and not sort of leave marks.
Wow.
But I just remember that it was a thud. But I'd say that, so when Renea was born, that was 1994. That, I guess, would have been the start of it. But then I hung around a little bit longer, and then I didn't actually physically break off with him until I had broken up with him many times, Evelyn.
All right.
Right, and then, but I kept going back thinking, I'm going to give him another chance. He's going to change. I'm going to be the woman that's going to change him. But that just never came to fruition.
So what was it that when you first met him that attracted you to him? Was there some redeeming factor, and then did he sort of just latch on to you, or?
Not really. I mean, as young, I was not. I was 19, right? I had maybe only spent 6 months in Melbourne. I had just sort of, starting to go out with my sister, with my uncle, with new friends. And then he just came out of the blue, met at a nightclub. Nothing sort of that I can pinpoint that was so amazing about him. But yeah, we just clicked, right? And, when you sort of meet someone new, you're attracted to them, they're attracted to you. Yeah, it was right at the time. I still feel, though, that God placed him in my life because he wanted for me to sort of feel how it was to not be treated so well.
Were there any red flags, though?
Yes, definitely, because, he'd get mad very quickly, which is a major red flag. He was very jealous as well. Yeah, but now obviously from what I've learned about guys that do abuse their partners is that there's obviously, you know, they're hurt and because they're hurting, they feel as if the only person that they need to hurt is the person that's in front of them, and that just happened to be me.
Wow. And after you left him, did he try to find you, or did he, because you do share a child together, was there any co-parenting, or no, it was just like, no, I'm taking my daughter and yeah.
No, Evelyn, I can say that there was no support whatsoever, no child support, no co-parenting support, nothing of that whatsoever. And I feel that has, that's obviously affected my daughter now. And although she has a very strong relationship to Chris, my second long-term relationship, it's not the same, right? When you have this love, or when a daughter has a father, she just naturally wants to know who the biological father is, and because that hasn't gone as well as what she'd like.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, I'm sure I can tell you on air, because pretty much everyone knows that he hasn't even met her children. So
wow.
Does that sort of explain the...
Yeah, his sort of where he's at, I guess, and yeah. It's so I actually cannot relate at all, to a relationship like that, because I haven't been in one of those. But it is interesting to speak with women who've been in that situation, how they've gotten themselves into that, and what are the red flags? Because I'm sure the listeners out there would probably like to know if there were any red flags. And like you just shared, jealousy is one of them. And being possessive, would that be another one?
No, definitely being possessive. Yeah. I mean, I know when I celebrated my 21st, and I had a good friend of mine, Karina, with me up from Tasmania, and we went out with her boyfriend and a few friends. But then when we got home, he just sort of turned.
Wow.
And the only person he wanted to hurt was me. Right. And so to do that and make a big impact, everything in the unit was smashed, right?
Wow.
And he did try to hit me, but then my girlfriend sort of got in front of him and prevented that from happening, because he didn't want to hurt her.
Right.
He wanted to hurt me. But the police was called and everything, but that, like I said, that wasn't the first time. There had been other times before Renee was born where the police had been called. He may not have been physically abusive at that stage, but he was still, it was about to get to that, and I didn't want it to get to the physical part. Yeah. So therefore ringing the police and then hiding away, in the car park, waiting for the police to come.
Right.
And then also heading, when those incidents happened, I sort of ran out of places to go, right? Because I've just found I didn't want to impede that or put that onto my family members or my friends. So I sort of started to retract a bit, and some of the times where it happened, I may not have talked about it because I just didn't want anyone to know more about it. But I have recently heard that about 70% of women who have been through family violence or domestic abuse are working women, right, who are educated, university graduates, not what we feel, right? The single mom, young mom, no qualifications whatsoever. It's not that at all.
Yeah,
it really is quite...
it is very surprising when you meet with people and you find all levels, there is no discrimination, is there, at all with what's going on. And does it first start off with verbal abuse and then goes on to physical? Is that how that usually...
So it would have been at least about 18 months of verbal emotional abuse before the actual physical abuse, and there was also some sexual abuse there too. So
wow. I can't even imagine. That would have been so horrible, and not feeling like you could get out of it. Was that what you were?
Yeah. There was a time when I really did fear for my life, and I think that was one of the things that was the catalyst, I suppose, for me leaving. So I remember we went to it was either an 18th or a 21st birthday, and I wanted to leave. I was ready to leave. You know, we had our daughter with us, and yet Charlie wasn't ready to leave. And because he was so angry about leaving, he drove, even though he wasn't meant to. So he was drunk.
Oh my
and
goodness.
he drove.
Yeah.
My daughter was in the back of the car. We were driving through 60-kilometre zone, right? But he was doing 110. I could see it, right? And at that point, of course, you're fearful because, you just don't know what's going to happen. So of course you're feeling that fear, but that was also part of the reason then that which led me on to not too long after that. There was a time when he came home one night, and it was quite late. He woke me up, and then there was just a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of sort of pushing and shoving around. And then he just had, the first time this has happened is that he had one hand around my neck and with a knife in one hand, and then sort of like, threatening to kill me, right? Or threatening you effing this, effing that. I remember that. But then what I distinctly remember so clearly is to see my daughter walk in at that stage. When that happened, that was the turning point, honey.
I can imagine.
That was the point where I just thought, F this, right?
Yeah.
I do not want my daughter to grow up thinking that this is what a healthy relationship looks like when it definitely wasn't that. And I know that she'd seen or probably heard more than just that time, but I feel that has sort of had a bit of a knock-on effect with my daughter too, because she's obviously had some, times in her life where she hasn't felt so enough, right?
Yeah.
And I know that probably, stems from the time, from the age of a very young girl to the time that I left him, which she was only 4. Yeah, she had just turned 4, I believe, when I had just, I had just left him. So still very, very young, but as we know, and someone who has studied change and neuroscience, it's all learned, right, within the first 0 to 7 years. There's such an impact that can be made at that time, not just the great stuff about learning languages, different languages and but there's just so much that stems from that, and then therefore comes the intergenerational.
Exactly. You hear about that a lot.
And I guess it's just about trying to talk about it and because everyone has their stories, right? And,
they do have their stories.
There are a lot more women who have been through worse than me, right? Even though I know that I went through pretty horrible stuff, and I really appreciate you wanting to hear more about that, because I haven't really talked about it. So
thank you. No, thank you so much for sharing. It's such it's a hard conversation when you think about your life and think about what you've gone through. And I can't even imagine. I just feel like you're so strong to get out of that. And so you were able to get out of that relationship and move on. How that must have been so hard to move on. Like, what did you actually do? Did you? Yeah.
Well, I feel that I was strong all the way along, right? But there was obviously those times when you just felt like shit, and you just didn't want to come out. You didn't really want to talk to anyone, really. And I think I just didn't probably speak to my parents for a little while, didn't speak to my sister for a while. But that night, that physical night that I decided to leave him, I remember saying, I'm making the decision and I'm going. I'm leaving you tonight. And I remember it was a Friday night, and he was out drinking with some of his friends. And I remember him saying, well, just wait until I get home. And of course, I didn't wait until he got home. I packed a suitcase for me. I packed a suitcase for my daughter, and I left. He had the car, so I didn't even know where I was going to leave. But of course, I had the nous enough to read about what did girls who were abused, where did they need to go, what were the next steps. So I found a shelter, and they took me in. And
So how long were you in the shelter?
I'm thinking maybe 6 weeks or so, 4 to 6 weeks. So it wasn't a long time, but I was safe, right? And I guess that's the most important thing, that I was safe. My daughter was safe. There was no drinking. There was no violence. There was none of that happening in this shelter. But I do remember, as I was being interviewed, the girl that was helping me, she was just so lovely. I can't remember her name, but I just thought, one day I would love to do what she's doing. I would love to do, that sort of counseling of others that have gone through this, because it was pretty heavy, right? It probably doesn't sound as heavy, but it just sort of came into my head at that time that whatever it was that I was going to do, whatever it was that I wanted to help others in a similar situation.
There you go. That's interesting, because that's kind of what you are doing now.
Yes,
you are helping people. So it's funny how the hardest times in your life really are the catalyst to bring you to what you are meant to be doing. And you're so lucky that you got out of that relationship and out of that abuse. And you probably after that said, no more. I'm never going to be with a man who treats me like that again.
Absolutely, Ev. But even then, I don't believe that I knew my worth then, right? Because you don't when you've just finished being pulverized. It never got to the stage where I had black eyes and things like that, or broken shoulders. Where there's some of the stories that I've heard have just been horrendous, but the other stuff, on top of all of that other stuff, the physical and the sexual abuse, it all sort of compounds, and it really leaves you, there's not really words to describe it, right? It's stunned, it's afraid, it's, not really there's no words really to describe how a woman who has been abused feels like once they leave. But you're just super grateful, right, that you've left. And there had been times where he did come back into my life and say, and ask to return and that sort of thing. And and it's hard, because you've sort of gone through those cycles, and you think that you've broken them, but then that happens, and you just feel, that out of the goodness of your heart, that you're just going to give him, maybe just one more chance, or maybe in a drunken night, maybe, but it just never, you can never change the spots of a leopard or the stripes of a leopard, right? You can never change that. And however, what I thought would be, I'm just grateful that it never, I didn't sort of have a long term or decide to go back and try and make it work, because it never did work. He went on to have multiple more partners, multiple more children, and it just
same sort of cycle with him. Now, for those listeners out there, we are actually in Australia. Might sound a bit different because I have a bit of an accent, but I want to actually touch on that. So being in Australia, the services for women who are in that sort of situation, are they helpful, or did you find like the shelters, were they helpful? I know this was quite a while ago, but at that time, did you find them helpful and welcoming? And
I did. Obviously I hadn't really experienced too many. I was only in one shelter. Right. Or it might have been a landing area, like maybe a landing house first. I think it was in Carlton or Fitzroy, and then I was moved somewhere out in Reservoir somewhere.
But you felt safe. So that
I did feel safe, but it got to the stage, I remember the house that we were in, I was sharing with a lovely Chinese lady who would cook us amazing Asian food, right? You're being a lover of food. But then I didn't like the fact that was also a lady there that was coming off methadone, right? And still, because as you're coming off that, you still need to have certain injections, and I guess I just didn't really want that around my daughter. Here I was, I had just left her. We've just left an abusive relationship, and it was like I really didn't want her to sort of see anything else that could also impact her little mind. And in the end, I ended up leaving that shelter myself, and I found a place to rent, and it was a bedroom. It was a room in a beautiful house with a lake sort of running out the back, and it was just lovely, I suppose, at that time. And that's where my daughter and I ended up catching the bus or the train into work, into Richmond.
Oh, that's it's a good story.
A good sort of outcome, at the end.
Well, okay. So after this stage of, so you found work, I'm assuming, and then
I never left work, right? Mm-hmm. So I just I may have just taken some time off. I can't really recall what I was doing at that time. Like, I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, that's okay. Look through your resume. Okay, no, that's fine. I
was working, right?
Yes,
because I had a vehicle, I had a motor vehicle which I was paying off. So I definitely was working. I just probably would have asked. Yeah, probably would have just had a few days off here and there.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing this this courageous conversation and chapter of your life, which was very, very difficult. Now, I just want to talk about another topic, which another layer of your life for the listeners there. And as most of the listeners who are listening now know, that we've gone through a bit of COVID, and there's been lockdowns in different parts of the world. We've been wearing masks. But something tragic that has happened in your life is that your father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he was dying. So you're here living in Australia. He's in New Zealand. Of course, the laws are happening with the countries being locked down. So I just would like if you could share with us that sort of moment when you found out about your father, and what did you actually do? Did you have to apply to the New Zealand government to go over?
Yeah. Evelyn, that the stuff, as in the administrative stuff that we did prior to getting there, for me, that was easy, right? For me, for others, it may have seemed like quite cumbersome, but for everything that I had felt, after learning about Dad, things like that, we really weren't that significant, right? Like booking, with a managed isolation quarantine people, it wasn't that difficult. But it's still, I cannot believe that it's still going now. Because I was looking for some flights for next year, and they've got Air New Zealand have got red flights and green flights, right? Red being fully vaxxed, and the others being non-vaxxed. And but it is always difficult. I don't think I've cried so much, Ev, right after finding out that, and because we didn't, like, Dad didn't just ring and say I've got pancreatic cancer. He rang and said, I've got to the stage where I'm so hurt, or the tummy, the pain that's in my tummy hurts so much that I've had to go into hospital. And so, of course, at that time, I remember when I got that message from my sister, I don't know what it was, Ev, but I contacted 3 of my close cousins in Hamilton, which is where my dad is, and I even contacted a cousin in Niue Island, which is thousands of kilometers away. But I just felt as if I needed others to be there for my eyes, or just some others for support. And I guess I'm just also grateful that I have such a good family, like such a close family. So my cousin Jonathan, my cousin Linda, and her cousin Jessica from Hamilton, and my cousin Coral in Niue. Somehow I just knew that by building a almost like a brick, right? Like a brick wall to help like your army soldiers around you. It was almost like that. Yes, I had my sisters. Yes, I had my mom and my dad, right? But it was my dad that we were trying to nurture. And because being here in Sydney, it's hard for you to visit your dad while he's, going through that stage of finding out what the diagnosis was. And so at that stage, we didn't know. So that was a Wednesday, and we found out on the Friday morning. And so from that Friday morning probably is when my life has just, changed a little bit more than the stories that I've just told you before. I think all of that, from that moment, everything else just seems minuscule, right? Everything else just doesn't really. I mean, there's nothing that is more important than the man that made you. Exactly. Like, because he literally did. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be here today if him and Mum. You know.
So you were able to get over to New Zealand, but you did have to quarantine, right? For 2 weeks, or how did?
For 14 days, yes. So I arrived. Can't remember the date, right? But I came out of there on the 4th. So whatever 14 days was from the 4th of March, and my sister was also quarantining in Christchurch, but she had gone over maybe 3 or 4 days prior to me with the flights and with the, combining that with the quarantine services. And so while I was in quarantine, I did actually go through some issues with quarantine. I don't even think I've mentioned it to you, no. Right? But while you were in quarantine, you have to wear these bracelets.
Okay.
Right? I don't know, in case you wander down the street past all these army guys and get lost or something. I'm not really sure why we had those bands on, but we had breached. So myself and a guy, we had only been there 1 day, and you can imagine, you're going, especially for someone like me, I was going through the grief of losing my dad, knowing that we were going to lose him, and then having that on top of that, but then having this incident on top of that as well. It was almost like, are you freaking kidding me? What else is there? What else are you going to give me? But the thing is, why it makes it so huge is that this guy, the guy that ended up cutting off our bands after we breached coming down the lifts together, because they said that only one person was meant to use the lifts coming down.
Yeah.
But obviously, because, I'd been traveling, I'd maybe forgot, or maybe just wasn't really taking any notice. But so we came down, and the head of the army force or defense
security guards or
force came up. No, he was the
my goodness,
the head of the head, because he was the guy that came into the bus as we drove into the hotel in Auckland, not far from the airport. He was the one that literally came in and gave us the laws, right? This is how you're going to behave. This is what you're going to do from the next 14 days, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. I've got it down somewhere. But I do remember videoing him. Anyway, in front of everyone, he cuts off
your band,
my band, and he also cuts off the guy who I didn't know. Right, we were purely just talking, as you do, coming down, and he had already done 7 days quarantine.
Oh, you're kidding
me! But the leader, the head guy, said, "This is going to." However many days you've been here, this is actually going to take you back to 0 days.
Okay.
And I just thought, Evelyn, this is so unfair. Yes, I've only just started my quarantine, but this is so unfair for that guy.
Yep.
So something inside of me just said, show me the legislation. Show me where it is in the legislation, why that was so wrong. Why did I breach that?
Right.
When you show me that, I'm happy to come and chat to you again. I don't know what happened there because I know, personally, knowing legal friends, that there is no legislation to do with that, right? So in the end, he wasn't able to provide me with the information that I asked for or the evidence that I needed. And he ended up giving us back
your
bands. And therefore we could go back out and do whatever we needed to do, right? The exercise that we could do each day. So the band was to show that you were there.
So if you would have gotten the bands taken off, you wouldn't have been able to exercise.
I wouldn't know. We had to have stayed in our rooms for the next 2 days or something like that. And I just thought, how unfair for this guy.
Right. I see. Yeah.
How unfair was he, like, to just jump on us, and not even sort of give us a first warning or something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I just felt more for the guy that he was going to have to start his quarantine all over again when he had already done 7 days. That to me was not unfair. It was just unjust. So I challenged him, which is probably something that no one else would have done. Like, there were so many witnesses, right? And he didn't just take us into a room, Evelyn. He did it right there in reception. Like, he did it in front of everyone in quite a interrogating manner as well. And I've not mentioned this story to anyone. Yes, I mentioned it to my family, my close-knit our group. But it's stories like that, I guess, that don't get out, so then others can...
So then you were given back the quarantine of how many days? So this gentleman, he didn't have to stay an extra week. Is that correct?
No, he just went back to his normal. We got our bands back on and we were allowed to sort of do whatever. And still, I still asked for more information, but the information that he did end up providing me, and he actually knocked on my door, physically knocked on my door, because I guess he wanted to have the last word. Right. But in the end, whatever he gave me, the link, I couldn't even get into it because he needed like a password. Right. But anyway, so that was just one incident in there, because I was breached again, and I think the third time I was breached again by going too closely to someone as I was coming around the corner. So we were allowed to go around and exercise 2 times a day, but we had to stay 1.5 meters apart, or whatever it was, 2.5 meters apart. And these guys were just watching me, I suppose, after that incident. So I guess they just had me under their radar. So I wasn't just breached once, but twice, third time. And then I thought, my goodness, nothing is more important than me getting out and see my dad. I'd better just sort of hone back a bit. And so I did. And I was out at 14 days.
I can't believe it.
But it was, it was pretty.
So you wouldn't think that would be such
a huge
experience. So
but it was.
It was.
It was like another layer.
Another layer.
To add on to my other layers.
Layer of your... And so you were able to get out, thank goodness.
I was able to get out, and I was so thankful because I met some beautiful people, right? A girl in Sydney and also a girl in Melbourne, and a guy here in Sydney that I'm still in touch with. So and I think when because also while I was in quarantine, the girl that I happened to meet that was from Sydney, we met during gathering our baggaging before we got on the bus. Her father actually passed away, same age as my dad, from the same thing as my dad. And when that sort of thing happens, you just have to come together, right? There's having to come together. And that also then sort of prepared me, I suppose, for my dad, because she knew my dad was dying of pancreatic cancer. It was her mother that had passed away from pancreatic cancer a couple of years prior. And her father had a liver condition, but he was the same age as my dad. But at the end of the day, he died while we were in quarantine.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, and then the similar horrible things happened with MIQ. They didn't allow her to go out and see her dad right?
Yeah.
And so we just sort of kept encouraging her to just keep hammering them every single hour until they came back and said, yes, you are allowed to go and see your dad, even though he had died, right?
Yeah.
At least she got to be with him. And funnily enough, we just said to her, keep praying, keep just channeling your energy into just continuing to. So we were supporting her even at a time when we didn't really have the tenacity in us, but we were just sort of gathered around her.
Wow.
That morning of her father's funeral, MIQ came and got her at 4 a.m. and took her to spend a few hours on the day of the dad's funeral.
Yeah.
So we were so elated.
That's so good.
Even though it was such a horrible thing, we were so elated that she was able to go and see her dad. And
sorry, what is MIQ? Because that
managed isolation quarantine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and unless you're flown, you don't know.
No,
unless you're flown into New Zealand, or I'm pretty sure they call it that around the world. But unless you know, though, unless you've travelled, you don't know what MIQ is.
Yeah, no idea. Wow, I can't believe that's another layer.
Another not stripe, right? Because it's got nothing to do with how many stripes you have on your, how many ranks or what your title is on this guy's thing. But he just annoyed me. I remember that day when he couldn't provide me with the evidence that I needed.
Yeah, you probably made him more angry.
Yeah,
I
did because no one's had ever challenged him.
Wow.
No one would, right? You'd think that someone's in uniform, so you're going to do whatever they say. But one of the things my dad's always taught me, right?
Yeah.
You can't just let people just get into your heads, and I think that's the other reason about being so strong about the vaccine. With all due respect to him and our forces, our defence forces, the army, the police, with all due respect to them, but they are, at the end of the day, they are just following rules.
Yeah,
they're following rules from someone else, from someone else, from someone else, from the government, and we just need to
doing the best they can.
Make sure that you're also doing the best that you can with you, and if you can, you need to challenge things, right? You shouldn't just accept things because they are, because that's what it is, or that's what it says on there. But it was just so funny that he could not provide me with
provide you with
legislation.
That. Yeah, I can't even believe you went through that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that story. So okay, you finally get out. So how many days were you able to spend with your father before he passed?
It was only 7. So it's 4th. And the thing, my birthdays will never be the same, I don't think, because my birthday was the next day. And I think that I had probably timed the flight and the 14 days of quarantine, because I knew that the next day I would see, be spending it with my dad. And I literally did not leave his side, I don't think, the whole time
that you were there,
that I was there. But it was probably one of the best, beautiful birthdays, right? I remember having my cake on the bed with him. Yeah, it's just a very special day. So even though, that point when I got home and I saw Dad on the night that I got out of quarantine was very, very special. But just to be able to spend that day on my birthday with him, the man that created me, that was pretty bloody special.
That is beautiful. Was he able to stay pretty with it until his last day?
No, definitely. He was still telling stories, even though he was in incredible pain.
Yeah.
He was on 4 or 5 different types of medication, one of those being the real whatever the strongest painkiller was, that's what he was on. And we were told that the day that he doesn't want to take any more of those is probably the day that we need to take him back into hospital. But I guess all of us, we didn't know how long that was going to be. I mean, I didn't know how long it would be that I would be in New Zealand, so I had given up my rental property, right, in Thornton, as you know. But it just went way too fast, and I guess the other thing too is that even though Dad had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, on the night of the 11th, or the morning of the 11th of March, he actually tripped. Yeah, he slipped as he was heading to the toilets. And then that's why we had to call the ambulance, because it felt as if my dad was going to pass away then, because he was hyperventilating, right? He couldn't breathe. He had this like sullen look. It was not that was not a good time, but we rang the ambulance and the ambulance came and took him to hospital, did all these tests, but then later found out that he was bleeding from somewhere, but they couldn't find out from where. And even though that they had done all these blood tests and pricked him here, everywhere, moved him up to this ward, a beautiful ward, looking out into the helicopter thing, so we could actually watch the helicopters come in and drop patients off and things. But we were looking over this beautiful mountain called Mount Pirongia. So even though it was the hardest time, like really horrible, shitty time, there was still beauty there to be seen.
Yeah.
Right. And there was still
So he passed.
the essence of beauty.
Yeah. So he passed in the hospital then.
He was meant to. Even the doctors didn't know, right? They couldn't. They had no idea where the bleeding was coming from. So we still, to this day, and we won't ever know, because we didn't ask for an autopsy or anything. We just said yes, that he died because of complications with pancreatic cancer. But after stuff coming out from here, this end, stuff coming out from that end, multiple bags of blood being given to Dad. So he had lost a lot of blood, and they said that they were going to place a camera down his tubes to find out exactly where the bleeding was coming from. But so he was fine from when we saw him up at the ward. We just said goodbye to him as if we were going to see him again, right? Once he came out. So we didn't even, I don't even think we really hugged Dad that hard, because we really did have that belief that they were going to find out where the bleeding was coming from. They were going to fix him, and we were all going to go home in 2 or 3 days, right? Dad would recover from hospital, and we would get to spend a few more days with him. And when that didn't happen, Ev, I think I've told you the last time when you were here, that final moment when they come and then, wash his body down and then stick him into this bag, and then we were like following him on this trolley with his 2 guys down and around wherever downstairs to the morgue. And I think I remember you telling you that it was the longest walk of my life, right? But until you go through that stuff, you don't. I think I'm just grateful that my entire family were around at that time, and we did get to, see him, and relatives from all, from Niue, my cousin Brendan, even my niece Yale, aunties were able to talk to him before he was pronounced gone at 10:26 that night.
Wow.
So from 1 a.m. in the morning when he tripped, when he slipped, we all sort of that was a long night. And then to go home without Dad, in the car, it was not a very nice. I don't think neither of us spoke.
Yeah, you probably just didn't know what to say.
No,
I mean, I
didn't realize you went through that experience in the hospital, but you would think that there would be different practices, you know, from not having to put a loved one like what you just shared in a bag. You know what I mean? That just seems horrible.
I know, but it's just we've never experienced that before, ever. Right? Not to that
extent.
Not to that closeness, right? When someone so close to you passes away, where that happens, and
Yeah.
So that was about Dad. I don't know
Yeah.
if you were meant to ask about that, but you got it.
That's all right. That's all right. No, but what I do,
God bless him.
it's been so lovely talking to you. I just want to talk about one more thing because we've almost been
thank
talking for
you.
almost an hour, which has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, doesn't feel like it.
So with your father's funeral now, do you have a tradition in your culture where you bring the body home? Is that correct?
Yes,
It's
yes.
similar to the Maoris,
Yeah,
right? It's
it
very
is.
similar.
Yep.
So yeah, take us through that because that really fascinates me. How your culture and other cultures do bring the body home and sit with the body for what was 3 days, or how does that work? Are they
So Dad was buried on the 17th, right? On the
Okay.
Wednesday. So he passed on the Thursday. Usually what you're meant to do is like try and have them buried within 3 to 4 days. But that
Okay.
was just too fast for
Yeah.
us, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't even think enough, right? to let alone get it done in that time frame. But for ever since I can remember, I remember when my dad's mum passed away, Siale Martha, and even though my grandmother was not Maori, we had her funeral in a marae, right? In a marae, a beautiful marae in the city. And I still remember, so I was 6 years old at the time, and I still remember going through that process of taking off your shoes before entering this beautiful meeting place, right? The marae is such and it's such an honor to have your body bestowed there and have, mattresses all around and family come around from everywhere around New Zealand and the world to pay their final respects. But I remember the story, I'm telling this story because my dad never allowed me to enter before he said to me, with everyone that you meet as we're going to meet family, make sure that you say the words whakalofa lahi atu, which is hello, how are you? Or hello, I love you in Niuean. And I remember that, when my dad, when it was time to bring him home. So it wasn't at a marae. One of Dad's requests was that he was brought home. So it was within, so he died on the 11th and it was on the 12th. On that Friday night, we brought him home and it was just wonderful, right? How we can, even though we're not really thinking, thank goodness for my sisters and my aunties and my uncles and cousins that were with us to help, go through that whole funeral process is what you would know. And during that time, as we were going through the funeral processes, I was also trying to deal with my daughter and my son heading over. My son wasn't allowed to come over because he didn't have a visa and he didn't have this, he didn't have that. And because he was traveling with his sister who had a completely different name to him. Anyway, so I was trying to deal with that while we were doing the funeral arrangements. But in the end, it was such a beautiful moment bringing Dad home, right? It was such even though it was a sad time, it was such a beautiful event. And I think you just get to the stage in your life, Ev, where you just see beauty in everything, right? Even you find joy in even like the most horrible, horrific spaces. But it was just lovely having Dad home with us. And I remember posting something, because I always sort of thought, why would these people be getting on social media one day or 1 hour after what is going through their heads? But that was spirit driven. I have no idea how I even did that, but it just did. And I guess that's how I sort of managed to let people that didn't know that Dad had passed know. But it all sort of just happened.
I remember that because I think it was Facebook Live. But I loved it. I really loved being there with you, even though I wasn't there with you physically, but I was there with you sort of through the airwaves and seeing that live. I mean, I love that
tradition, the Maori tradition and Pacific Islander, and just how they honor their dead, and they're not afraid of being with their loved open casket and fully mourning too.
It really is a way of helping that grief, right? Not to dissipate it.
Yeah.
Not for it to dissipate, right?
Yeah.
But it's still there.
Yep.
But just that whole connectiveness of family and relationships. And that's why it's so important, right? To whatever it is that's going on in your life, whatever little things, like you might have a niggling with a relative, right? Just let that stuff go. Because at the end of the day, when a loved one is lying there like that, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't equate to that bigger picture, right? It doesn't equate.
I just find the expression and the full on wailing and mourning. I don't know if that happens at your funerals, but I mean, I've seen it other cultures where that really happens, and they even hire an official mourner to do that. I know in the Maori tradition they do. They hire the caller. It's the don't know the name.
Someone who does
like a call
talangi or
something like that.
There's a certain word in the Maori term.
But
it's just wonderful, I guess,
I love it.
in terms of the singing, the praising, the honoring, the praying over and with the not just the person who's passed, like not just with Dad, but with the whole family and with the whole house and with the whole. It really did feel, even though there may have only been 10 or 15 people in the room, it felt as if our entire 1,500 wide relatives were there, and and our ancestors and our, it just felt as if it was all meant to happen. In those at that time. But we're also very proud of ourselves too, right? Because you don't know how much you have until you're sort of put into that situation. You don't know how much grit or gumption that you have until you're put in that position to stand up and show up and do what you need to do. And yes, there were little things that we had to deal with family, and but they were only little compared to
the thing of losing your father.
No, that's right. Nothing was more important than that. But at the end of the day, I know that we gave him that we put together something very, very special. And I know that people will be talking about
that
the funeral for a very long time.
I love it.
It was really nice to honor Dad that way. So
I do love it. I mean, the only good thing from COVID, or one of the good things of COVID, is how Zoom and televising funerals have become really mainstream. It's now more people are attending funerals virtually than ever before, mainly because sometimes that's the only way you can attend. But now people overseas are able to attend, which wouldn't have before, like even just a few years ago.
Especially with 24-hour flights. Right? So sometimes it's a bit impossible to get to.
It is impossible, but Zoom has allowed it to become more mainstream, and I think, like, even with yours, because you put it on Facebook Live, people probably wouldn't have done that before, but because of COVID, it's like, I've got to let my other relatives see what's happening. But it's becoming more mainstream, and I do like that. So,
and it's also good to it's actually on a timeline, right? So I can always go back and revisit it. And of course, I've only gone back once, right? Because it does brings up
of course,
beautiful memories, but also not so great memories. So you don't. You really do pick your times, and
of course,
when the next time comes, I'll be elated at it. But thank goodness for social media.
Thank goodness, and all the technology that's out there. Well, we're coming up to an hour, so I think I need another show with you where we will talk about your business and how it's going. And everything, but I think we'll do that for another show, which will be part 2. So yes, you're listening to Evelyn here on Life's Rich Tapestry. Thank you so much for your company, and thank you, Marie, for coming in today.
You're welcome, darling.
Thank you so much for your company. I look forward to you joining me in another episode of Life's Rich Tapestry.